Hello and welcome to lab number 5. Today we're going to talk about gymnosperms and angiosperms, but before we get there, I wanted to show you guys that when you are on the lab recordings page, if you scroll down and click on whatever lab recording you're watching, I just wanted to make sure you knew this. If we open this up, you'll see here in the description section, if you click on show more, you can actually skip right to, sorry about my loud voice, but you can skip right to each part by clicking on these. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that you all knew that. So to the lab material for lab number 5, I wanted to start by reviewing a little bit with you all. So make sure you know the alternation of generations. I always like to start with spores. The process through which the spores grow larger is mitosis. They're going to grow into a gametophyte. That gametophyte produces gametes, which are haploid cells. They're going, like, for example, egg and sperm. They're going to fuse together and grow into a zygote. The zygote is going to grow larger through the process of mitosis. It's going to grow into a young sporophyte, which produces spores. Remember that the spores are haploid, and the only way to get haploid cells through cellular division is to do meiosis. Okay, so everything up top is haploid, everything below the line is diploid. Alrighty. So don't forget, gametophytes make gametes in gametangia. Sporophytes make spores in sporangia. Okay? So this week we're going to talk about gametophytes that produce gametes in their gametangia. For example, the gametangia would be like a pollen grain. The gametes would be sperm, right? So ovulate cones would be the gametangia, and then egg cells would be the gamete for that. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we're going through. But just a little bit of review here. What are the two types of vascular tissue? Remember that xylem is going to transport water and minerals from the roots up to the rest of the plant, and phloem transports photosynthetic products from the leaves or other photosynthetic parts of the plants like stems down and kind of all around, right? So those photosynthetic products are sugars, for example, glucose, and that is what's being transported by the phloem. So you are responsible for site identification for the practical, which is online. Remember that the lab practical is all fill-in-the-blank questions. So what plant are we looking at here? If you said Lycopodiales or Lycopodium, you are correct. So remember that Lycopodiales is a part of the division Lycophyta. What plants are these? These are liverworts, known as Marcantiophyta. Remember that these are sexual as well as asexual. They have these little gemmacups for the asexual reproduction. They also have leafy thallus, so it's not necessarily true leaves, but they're leaf-like. Remember that these are non-vascular plants, okay, and they're going to produce spores. This plant here belongs to Polypodiales, which is one of our manilophytes. All right, these are our ferns. If we're looking at the back of a fern, we have all of these dots. Collectively, the plural for all of these dots would be sori. Okay, one individual dot would be called a sorus. We have a plant here. This belongs to Selaginales, which is a part of the division Lycophyta. So these Lycophytes, it includes two orders, so Selaginales and Lycopodiales, so don't forget. They also have two different sets of leaves, and they exhibit dichotomous branching as well. This plant here belongs to, so the common name is whisk fern. It belongs to Psilotales. Remember that these yellow dots are 3 fused sporangia. So those fused sporangia have a special name. It's called a synagium, and you are responsible for that as well. That is what houses the spores in the whisk ferns. These plants here, remember, have reduced leaves that wrap around the stem. They're also abrasive. I didn't talk about this last time, but they do have little silica bodies as well that are super abrasive. If you're in the woods, you can use them for scrubbing pots and pans or anything if you're camping. But these plants, the common name is horsetail fern, and Equisitales is going to be the order name. These are bryophytes, right? These are our mosses. They belong to Bryophyta specifically. Remember that when we say bryophytes collectively, that includes Marcantiophyta as well as Bryophyta. Both of those divisions are spore-bearing plants. They are also non-vascular. They do not have vascular tissue. All right, so when we're looking at a bryophyte or a moss, don't forget the top part up here is the sporophyte, okay? And the bottom leafy green section is the gametophyte. Remember that bryophytes, including the liverworts, so the Bryophyta and Marcantiophyta, are gametophyte dominant, right? All right, so today's material, we're going to discuss spermatophytes. They are called spermatophytes because they are seed-bearing plants. So we no longer produce spores like we did previously. We can now make seeds. We'll learn soon that some of our seed-bearing plants, the Angiosperms, produce flowers, and they house their seeds inside of fruits as well. So the only way to get a fruit is with a flower. Our Gymnosperms produce seeds in exposed cones, so their seeds are exposed, right? Some other terms that you'll need to know, make sure you fill these in on your tree if you haven't already, which is located on page 28, I believe. All of these plants have chlorophyll B in order to photosynthesize. They also, these up here, produce embryos. These are the beginning of our embryophytes. We have sporophyte dominant plants after our bryophytes, right? Bryophytes are gametophyte dominant, and sporophyte, or everything else is sporophyte dominant, right? We have vascular tissues and lignin. We also have megaphylls, which are true leaves. That starts with our manilophytes, right? Our ferns and up. And let's just get to the spermatophytes. So don't forget, our sporophyte generation is growing larger. Our gametophyte generation is much smaller now. So we have sporophytes that are the size of giant trees, and our gametophytes are only a few cells large. So spermatophytes, these are our vascular seed plants. The female gametophyte is going to still be dependent on the sporophyte. That's what it's going to grow out of. The male gametophyte, in this case, is going to be pollen grains, and our male gamete is sperm, right? Seeds are protected inside of embryos, or seeds provide embryo protection, so inside of the seed is an embryo. We don't have any flagellated sperm, which means we don't need water in order to reproduce anymore. Some of these plants have wood as well, which just increases the plant's ability to grow taller and stand upright. We have true leaves, which we usually use the term megaphyll. If you see the word euphyll, it's the same exact thing, just true leaves, okay, with true venation. And then we have vascular tissues, right, like xylem and phloem. Sometimes we'll, in these groups, we'll see even more complex vascular tissue. So we're going to talk about 8 different groups of spermatophytes, and we're going to start with our gymnosperms. These are the 4 groups of gymnosperms that you're responsible for knowing. The angiosperms, there are 4 groups here that you're also responsible for knowing. So we'll start with the gymnosperms, which, as I mentioned before, are our naked seed plants. And then our angiosperms, we have carpellate seeds, which are just inside of fruits. So let's talk about leaves real quick. This also applies to gymnosperms as well as angiosperms. So I mentioned megaphylls, which are our true leaves. We have 2 different types of leaves. So if you're looking here, if this is the stem of the plant, we locate the bud, and from there we can see the petiole, which is just the little base of the leaf, and then this is an entire leaf blade. So once we find that bud on the stem, we know that this is a single leaf. Now, if we're looking at a compound leaf, we find the bud on the stem, and we notice that the compound leaf is made of multiple leaflets, okay? So actually from here, this entire section is one leaf, all right? So in order to figure that out, you always just locate the bud. Oh, okay, that's a compound leaf. Locate the bud here. Oh, that's a simple leaf. So we have different types of leaf arrangement. Leaves can be whorled, which wrap around the stem. They can be alternate, so they're literally alternating. And then opposite, which they're directly across from each other. So let's see here. Pause the video for a moment and see if you can identify these 3 different types of leaf arrangements. All right, so if you said this first one was whorled, you are correct. This one here is alternate. Notice that we're alternating. And then this here, this is in the bean family. They are opposite leaves. So let's talk about gymnosperms. We're going to talk first about the Cnidophyta, then the Coniferaphita, then Ginkgophyta, and then Cycadophyta. Then evolutionarily, we'll get to the Angiosperms, which are much more complex. So gymnosperms in general, like I mentioned before, these are naked seed plants. We have gametophytes that are microscopic, and the female gametophyte is dependent on the sporophyte. So what that means is that these female cones, which house the eggs, actually have to grow off of the giant tree, which is the sporophyte, right? Oops. So we also have male and female cones. So these at the bottom, which would be at the base of a pine tree, these are our male cones that produce the pollen grains, which in turn produce the sperm. And then our female cones are usually located higher up on the tree, and they are going to house the eggs and eventually be pollinated and hold the seeds as well. We, in gymnosperms, do wind pollination and some insect pollination as well. We have true leaves and roots and vascular tissues. Our vascular tissues are going to be xylem and phloem. Xylem comes in the form of tracheids, which are like giant, think boba straw tubes, right? So if you've ever had bubble tea or boba tea, they're just giant tubes that you can suck water up into. And then our phloem, or our little sieve cells, they belong to every group of gymnosperms except for our Cnidophytes. They do not have sieve cells. So the first division that we're going to talk about are our cycads. I was in Portugal last year before COVID happened, and I was able to see these really beautiful specimens of cycads. So here we have a female cone set and we have a male cone set. So you'll notice that cycads are what is termed as dioecious, meaning that we have separate male and female plants. So therefore, if we're looking at a male plant, it's going to have a male strobilus or a male cone. If we're looking at a female plant, it'll have a female cone that looks like this with all of these seeds. We also have motile sperm, but it's not really used. They are actually pollinated by insects like beetles and thrips. We don't really need water. So even though they are motile, might be semi-flagellated or have some sort of swimming process, they don't need that in order to reproduce. We're also, we also see asexual reproduction in our cycads. So at the base of these plants, they kind of grow in clusters and they produce what are called pups or little stems. It's just a whole nother plant at the base of the mother plant. We also have coloroid roots in this group. Coloroid roots have a special symbiotic relationship with the bacteria, kind of a throwback to our azolla fern and our cyanobacterium, but that bacterium has the ability to fix nitrogen and make it bioavailable for the plant. So it's a great association. So here is our microsporangiate cone. Remember what I said last time about micro being the male part. I'm not going to repeat myself on that. But this is the male cone, okay? And inside of one of these microsporangia are the male gametophytes, which are our pollen grains, and then inside of those pollen grains would be the male gametes, which are sperm, okay? So one of these little cones looks like this, and then you get pollen grains from there. So our megasporangiate cone, this is the female. Remember, mega means female. We have one megasporophyll off of that, and then we get an ovule with a megagametophyte. Inside of that ovule are going to be eggs. So the megagametophyte, it has archegonia as well. So inside of the archegonia are the eggs. It's just all microscopic. All right, our next division is Ginkgophyta. There's only one species in this entire division, and it's Ginkgo biloba. These are also dioecious. You'll see we have male trees and female trees. We actually, landscapers in the United States at least, have bound together and determined that they are not allowed to plant female trees in public places because these, even though they look like fruits, they're absolutely not fruits because they do not go through a flowering process. These are actually fleshy seeds. When they rot, they smell absolutely horrible. So that is why they're kind of forbidden. So like I said, male and female trees. We still have motile sperm, don't really use it. The leaf veins are dichotomous. So I remember dichotomous is like Y-shaped branching. If you zoomed in really, really close, you would see Y divisions in the leaf veins as well. So those are our Y splits. We also have wind pollination in this group. And like I said before, fleshy ovules, and these are the male strobili. So this is the drawing that you'll need to do. You can see the Y splits up close, very, very up close. This is drawing number 2A. Drawing number 3 is going to be your microsporangiate strobilus of ginkgo. So that's just that strobilus just cut down the middle and across a longitudinal section. Not a cross section, that would be the other way, but longitudinal. And you'll notice the sporophylls with the pollen grains inside. Drawing number 4, you can go back to my prettier picture if you'd like to, but this is the female cone. So up close, female cone with the developing seeds. Make sure to label those. So our division Neophyta is next. We have some great plants in this group. The leaves are on opposite stems. Notice here Weltwischia. This plant actually only has 2 leaves, despite it looking like it has many more. It's very interesting. We have vascular system here. Remember, we have xylem with tracheids and vessel elements. We do not have any sieve cells or phloem. We have male and female cones in this group as well. So these are monoecious plants, so they will have male and female cones on the same plant. And we also exhibit pollination by insects or wind. What's really cool about this group, kind of interesting, we have some ephedra, which is a genus in this group, and they actually produce the chemical ephedrine, which is what you take typically when you are very sick. We also get methamphetamines from this group. Very exciting stuff. So our next division, Coniferophyta, these are our conifers, things like pines, cedars, sequoias. They're going to have reduced leaves in the form of needles, right? The are monoecious. There are some dioecious, very few. So typically this group is monoecious, meaning that the male cones and the female cones are on the same tree. So like I mentioned before, in pines, the female cones are going to be at the top of the tree and the male cones are at the base of the tree. We don't have motile sperm in this group. We don't need it anymore anyway. Wood is considered a secondary xylem, helping move that water and nutrients up from the roots up, right? And there's a lot of wind pollination, like I mentioned before, and male and female cones and strobili. So I told you male cones here with pollen, female cones here. Don't forget it. So this is our alternation of generations for our gymnosperms. What's happening here? Basically, you have a mature tree. In pines, it takes about 3 years to produce ovulate cones. Then we'll have some pollen cones, male cones at the bottom. They are going to produce pollen grains. Then the eggs from the female cones are going to or the pollen grains are going to locate the egg cells, right? Um, Eventually, fertilization will occur. It's going to grow into a seed, and then those seeds are going to germinate somewhere at some point and grow into a mature sporophyte after a while. So your required drawings here, remember this is the egg inside of the archegonium, right? And then this is the young ovule showing the megagametophyte. This is underneath a female cone with the seeds. You can see those seeds here. These are the little things that kind of helicopter down if you've ever seen those outside. And these are pollen grains, very up close. So you'll notice they kind of look like little Mickey Mouse ears or water molecule, if you will. It looks that way. They have little balloon sacs in order to float through the air. Okay, so that is one of your questions in your lab exercises. Make sure you fill that out. So now we're going to talk about angiosperms, the more advanced seed-bearing group. Angiosperms are awesome. They produce flowers, which some look very complex, like the Blakea subcanata or the birds of paradise here. And they also make fruit, right? So these are cacao pods, which I studied for a while. We have fruit, right, which is a mature ovary with a seed inside. Flowers, which are their purpose is to attract pollinators. We have a triploid endosperm. So that's pretty much baby food, right, for the young seed, the embryo inside of that seed. We have microscopic gametophytes this time, very, very small, like we did before in our gymnosperms. And we have more efficient vasculature. So tracheids and vessel elements are our xylem, and then our phloem, we have sieve tube elements. So tracheids, remember, are our boba straws, our bubble tea straws, and vessel elements also help out as well. So these plants produce flowers. You're going to be responsible for flower anatomy. So from the outside to the inside, the sepals are on the outside. These are little protective leaves that protect the petals. We have the petals, which also you may see the term corolla as well. For the sepals, you may see the term calyx. Stamens, this is going to be the more common term. Those are the male reproductive parts, and the carpels are the female reproductive parts. So we'll break those down a little bit more. So our stamens are male reproductive parts. The anther is at the top here. That is what's going to produce the pollen grain. And then inside of that is the sperm. And then we just have this filament here that holds the anther up. Our carpel is our female reproductive organ. It's made up of 3 parts. So we have the stigma, which is where the pollen grain lands. We have the style that holds the stigma up. And we have the ovary, which contains multiple ovules. At least one of them will be fertilized, and that's going to swell up and become the fruit. So a drawing that you're responsible for is lilium. This is a tetrad of microspores. So these are inside of the anther of a lily. We'll have pollen grains inside of here as well. So this is considered the male part inside of a lily. Then we have an embryo sac from an ovule of a lily as well. You'll notice all of the eggs inside. So fruit. This is just a ripened ovary. It aids in dispersal of seeds. So its purpose is to kind of trick biotic organisms, so any mammals, birds, whatever, into eating them and pooping them out somewhere else. So we also find fruit to be very important to our nutrition as well. Lots of fruits like bananas, beans, corn, and grains. We eat lots of those. But the biggest thing here is that there's a variety of fruit types. So we're going to talk about some of those fruit types. I'll tell you right now that vegetables do not exist. Everything is either a fruit, root, stem, or leaf. So types of dry fruits include things like nuts. An example would be an acorn. Achenes, those are the little sunflower seeds that you eat. Legumes like beans or peas. Um, More commonly, samara. These are maple fruits from maple trees. I'm sure you've seen these as well. They also kind of helicopter down. Caryopsis would be the name, the particular fruit type for grains or wheat. Um, Capsules like poppy capsules. So this is from a poppy flower. This is what swells up into the fruit. And then aggregate of follicles like in a magnolia. Okay. And then our fleshy fruits, you'll at least need to know a couple examples of either fleshy or dry fruits. That's hard to say. Fleshy fruits include drupes, anything with a hard pit, like a cherry, peach, or avocado, a pome, which would be like an apple or a pear, berries, which are tomatoes, oranges are modified berries. Its precise fruit type is a Hesperidium. Cucumbers are berries. Berries are basically anything with many seeds. Aggregate fruits like blackberries. So these are actually an aggregate of keens, right? Or this is actually, sorry, not a keen. This is not a blackberry. This is a mulberry. But aggregates of drupes would be a blackberry. Multiple fruit comes from multiple flowers. For example, a pineapple is a multiple of berries. It actually comes from multiple flowers. So let's talk about the different angiosperm divisions that you're responsible for. So you'll see anagrade, which is actually 3 different groups. Magnoliids, but collectively it's just one, really. We can just attribute them all to anagrade. Magnoliids, which are just magnolias, pretty easy to differentiate. And then monocots here and eudicots, and we'll talk about some of those differences. So first, anagrade. The reason why it has that name is because it stands for Amborales, Amborellales, Nymphales, and Austrobaleales. Kind of hard to say. But these organisms in this group have primitive flowers. They have petal-like stamens. Those are stamens actually and not petals. And they have many whorls, kind of layers of petals and anthers. Okay, so our water lilies, Amborella is a plant group that's native to like Australia, that kind of area, hard to find. And then things like star anise are in our Austrobaleales group. So magnoliids, these are what you're used to seeing here. So Piper niger, which is actually where we get black pepper, is in this group. We also have nutmeg in this group as well. So how to differentiate a magnoliid? They have 1 line opening in their pollen grains, and their flowers are usually in whorls of 3. Okay, so they're going to be in kind of groups of 3. Then we have our monocots groups, or our monocotyledons, meaning they only have 1 embryonic leaf, right? When they germinate, only 1 little leaf comes up. The easiest way to differentiate these plants is from their leaf venation. So if their veins are parallel, they're all facing the same direction down the leaf blade, then it's a monocot for sure. So they also have fibrous roots, which is interesting. But fun plants in this group include saffron. So the saffron that we eat is actually the stamens or the male parts from a flower, a crocus flower. Orchids, which are so diverse, the most diverse group of angiosperms, actually. They are so crazy with all the different hybrids and everything that I don't even bother learning them. Gingers, like this spiral ginger here, super fun. And then lilies, my favorite. Then we have our eudicots. Their flower parts are going to be in groups of 4 or 5. They have netted leaf venation in comparison to our parallel venation. So you'll see here that it's kind of in a netted web. And then the pollen grains have 3 line openings, which is called trichoplate pollen. So they have 3 little openings there. Lots of different types of eudicots, things like hibiscus, cactus flowers, peonies, for example, lots of different things. So our alternation of generations, we would start with a flower that's going to produce the pollen grains and the eggs, right? They're going to eventually, the pollen grain's going to land on the stigma, ride down the pollen tube into the ovary, reach an ovule. It's going to fertilize an egg inside of that ovule. We actually get what's called double fertilization, which I'll talk about in just a moment. That's double fertilization is how we get the triploid endosperm or the baby food. And then we get the zygote that's going to grow up and germinate somewhere. It's going to grow into a seed. We have what's called a seed coat, which is a little protective layer in addition to the food supply, which is that endosperm. And then the embryo itself, it's going to germinate into a sporophyte that's going to produce the flowers. And we do it all over again. So double fertilization, right? So when that pollen grain lands on the stigma, it actually has a couple of sperm cells inside of it. So what happens is it's going to go inside the ovule, germinate one egg cell, and then the other pollen grain actually fuses with two polar nuclei inside, and that is how we get the endosperm, the triploid endosperm. So we have 1, 2, 3 sperm cell and 2 polar nuclei. Those are haploid cells, so they're going to fuse together to make a triploid cell. And then the other sperm cell fuses with the haploid egg cell, and then we get a diploid zygote. So that is called double fertilization. So you will need to know that. Now you can do your lab activities. So everything is available for you in the lab manual. Please make sure to submit that online. This is all correct, I think. Yeah, this is all right. So make sure to do your lab quiz and your reading. You're going to need to study for the plant practical, which is next week. Remember that you'll have all week to do that lab practical online, and it is all fill in the blank. We're going to have some exam reviews online. I'm not going to do any in-person exam reviews. So I will send out the information about that very soon. But in 2 weeks, we're going to learn about animals, and we're going to start with sponges and cnidarians, which are jellyfish, corals, and sea anemones. So make sure, guys, to turn in your what is it called? Species Spotlight PDFs, the articles that you chose with your group. Please contact your group, start a group chat or whatever. You are not going to be penalized if your group members do not respond. Your group members are going to get a 0 for their project if they do not participate and do any work in the group portion, okay? So if you are worried about your grade, please don't. Just focus on yourself. Please report to me if your group members do not respond to you. It's very important that you do this early on and not when your project is due. Extremely important. Please do not do that. All right, so please reach out if you need anything at all. I will talk to you guys soon.